So. Okay, oh, no, that's not even that. Okay, there we go. Okay, so welcome everyone to the second lecture in, I think it's the 8th year. Thanks. We've been doing these Hempology lectures at the University of Victoria, and yeah, thanks everybody for finding us. It's been another sort of scattered year here, and I haven't promoted this as much as I'd like. I'd even forgot the poster today for this. But next week's lecture we're going to promote the hell out of, and hopefully it'll really pick this up, because Dana Larson's going to be here next week, and he's the main coordinator behind the campaign to decriminalize cannabis here in BC. And so we're really excited to have this campaign going on. We're really excited that Dana's going to be here for the lecture. He's staying behind. There's a meeting Monday night next week. And so we're really excited to have Dana here to talk more about the nuts and bolts of the campaign, not so much why we need to do it, but how we're going to do it. So it really complements Monday night's meeting. So hopefully the weather will be as nice as it is today, and we will be out on the lawn. It gives us a chance to communicate with more people. And otherwise, we will be in Cinevik. Depending on the weather, if it's this nice, we'll stay out here as long as we can. And so the following week, I have Sean here with Hemp & Company talking about hemp products. And so hopefully we'll be outside here, and we'll bring a table so that it helps with that sort of show and tell of hemp products, which is always fun to do. And actually probably have more guest speakers this semester than ever for a few reasons. So it's really quite exciting to be getting into this year, and even more so with my book in hand. But obviously I've been promoting my book more than my lecture series, so I'll have to try to again bring that together next week with Dana being here. But certainly in the meantime, I'm going to teach a lecture today in a way about why we're all here, because if it weren't for the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 and the forces behind that in the United States, because in Canada here is actually made illegal in 1923, 14 years before the US, and I'll explain why. But if it weren't for that, we wouldn't be here as we were. And so it's, I think, really important for those of us that want to change into the future to really have a good grasp of what got us here. And so that's why, to me, I really like teaching the history of cannabis and the history of prohibition. And so again, today's lecture is the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, but I'm going to go back in history to give people an idea of how it got there, because by 1937, by that time, there really wasn't much of a debate anymore. Ironically, that the last two groups of people fighting the Marijuana Tax Act were the American Medical Association, because they knew it was good medicine, that cannabis helped people with glaucoma and a number of other conditions that they didn't have good medicine for. And so the AMA was really the strongest advocate against the Marijuana Tax Act. And the second group was poultry farmers, because poultry farmers and chicken breeders in particular that are raising birds for eggs and just for food realized the benefits of feeding your birds hemp seed, because the essential fatty acids and other good stuff, the proteins and that appear in the hemp seed, are not only good for humans, they're basically good for every vertebrate animal. And birds really thrive. Their eggs were bigger, they'd produce more eggs, they'd just be much more robust, healthier chickens. And it was very obvious to poultry farmers, because birds are so susceptible to disease and such, that the difference for them was black and white. So they fought to the end, but to no avail. By 1937, the rest of Wall Street was completely opposed to the use of cannabis in any form. And it's kind of hard to understand why if you don't get the history. But really, cannabis threatens almost directly most of the major industries that North America built itself on today. And we'll start with cotton, because cotton was really instrumental in the development of the United States of America. When it was first settled, there were large tracts of land that could be easily turned into farmland, and certainly hemp was grown. In fact, for a while there was even a law that the King of England passed where I think it was 10% of a farm had to be in hemp. It had to be growing hemp. You could pay your taxes in hemp. You didn't necessarily have to. You could pay your taxes in cash, obviously. But they would also accept just the stalk, not even really processed hemp, that just the stalk of the plant. You could pay your taxes in. It was that important to the British because they used it for their canvas. This here is canvas made with the root word of canvas is cannabis, and it's made with hemp. And canvas, and good canvas and a good supply, was critical to the navies of the world in the 17 and 1800s. And Britain couldn't grow its own hemp. They couldn't develop its own hemp industry because it didn't have a good enough growing season most years. And so they were heavily reliant upon other sources. That's why they were so keen on developing North America, because it was seen as very fertile land to grow hemp. And cotton as well. Although cotton was a lot more labor intensive, so they needed, in their small minds, to enslave people to process cotton, which made it a lot cheaper to process than hemp. But still, hemp actually competed, and again with at least canvas was irreplaceable. Most people, though, were turning to cotton to wear, though, because it was softer at the time. Hemp is a bit coarser, and it takes a lot of chemicals, though, to produce it, and it also is very reliant upon fertilizers as well. And pesticides and insecticides were almost developed for the cotton industry because it was one of the first real mass-produced agricultural crops in North America through the 17 and 1800s. And so the cotton farmers knew all about hemp. In fact, there's stories about cotton farmers that grew a small acreage of hemp to use themselves, mostly for rope, because it's actually really easy to turn the stalk into rope. You basically have to just cut it down, and you can what's called retting or process it. And I guess it's important to explain that the hemp plant's got two parts, or the stalk. It's got the fiber on the outside and then the cork on the inside. And in ancient times, the cork wasn't good for very much. It was the fiber everybody wanted. That was what the Chinese made paper out of. You could spin it to make rope with fairly simple machinery, and to weave it into cloth like canvas was a little bit more intensive, but certainly to make your own rope wasn't very hard at all. And certainly until the early 1900s, it was the fiber on the outside that everyone found useful. And again, the cotton farmers would process the fiber and make their own rope, because you'd need to bale up the cotton, right? So they'd use hemp to bale their cotton that they would ship. And otherwise, like the canvas wagons that were going across the United States were being made out of canvas. So there were processing facilities in the United States. But to my knowledge, the British actually just shipped the raw stalks across to England, to their textile industries, at first anyway, until the textile industry here started to develop and it was manufactured here. But certainly in the 1700s and early 1800s, the hemp was being just shipped back to England. And the farmers in North America were quite resentful of how heavily taxed they were, because the British kept going to war with the French, and it was costing a lot of resources of the English monarchy, which is why they were taxing so much, and which is why they needed so much hemp, because the Navy was using hemp for all the rope and the canvas, right? And so they just needed more and more hemp. And so a large part of the American Revolution was because they were being taxed so much. And again, a lot of that was because the Americans wanted to keep their own hemp and use it themselves. There's a thriving domestic market that really grew in America, especially over the 1800s, to the point where Kentucky, by the turn of the 19th century, the 20th century, I guess, into the 1900s, Kentucky was a world leader in growing hemp and developing hemp strains. I didn't bring my good little old book, but I got this neat old book on the Kentucky hemp fields. Yeah, hemp had its heyday really in America in the 1800s, where it was the largest agricultural product in the world. And again, that was mostly for its fiber. It wasn't being used a lot for seed, although certainly it was being used for seed in food, for example, in more poor countries of the world. Because what started to happen in the 1800s was hemp was seen as a poor man's alternative to the more expensive products that the emerging middle class had available. So again, they were buying cotton over hemp because it was a little softer, and hemp was seen as peasants' clothing. Hemp was also seen as peasants' food. And so what we know now as gruel was actually hemp seed, maybe mixed in with a little oats and a couple of other seeds and stuff. But gruel was essentially hemp seed. And apparently for centuries, monks would eat gruel or hemp seed morning, noon, and afternoon with a few other things mixed into it to help it taste a little different. But that was why the monks had such a exceptional healthy lifestyle compared to other peoples who weren't able to eat as healthy. And so certainly the use of hemp seed in food was also, though, turned down in better economic times by most people as being something that they didn't eat, that they ate things that tasted better, because hemp seed doesn't really taste that great. There's not much of a taste to it at all, actually. And so it was not really known to be as nutritional as we know it now. It was just another product that could be available in the kitchen for oil or whatever, but it was just gradually over time dismissed as something that just wasn't good enough for the family. And so while hemp seed was in the kitchen for centuries through the Dark Ages, through the 1800s it was really being used less, and again was probably being used more for poultry farming than anything. Although it was being used in some other products, soaps and other products were being made with hemp seed, but not a lot. It was really the fiber that was being used. But again, it was the largest agricultural commodity throughout the world because everybody's navy depended upon it. And the world at the time, before the age of steamships, was really built upon who had the biggest and fastest navy. And so in a lot of ways, the American Revolution was even a battle between the sort of agriculturalists of the South and the sort of military-industrial complex of the North. And the military-industrial complex won. And so in many ways it was a good thing, but in other ways for farmers not so much, because by the turn of the 19th century, the U.S. economy was really being driven by the military. And there was a number of, factors that were building against the use of cannabis that weren't hemp related. And so, one of them is the fact that Mexicans had been turned on to cannabis and were growing it relatively freely as the U.S. Developed. And there were a lot of religious people in the United States that weren't very happy about the use of any drug. In particular, the Mormons in Utah, they did not believe or do not believe in the use of drugs or even coffee, I believe. And so there was a problem in Utah where they had even their own young men move away for a short time, start to use cannabis, and then actually bring it back to Utah. So it's my belief, or my understanding, that in 1915, the state of Utah was actually the first government body in the world to create anti-cannabis law. And it was for the use of cannabis. It had nothing to do with hemp. The connection really between the hemp that was being grown by farmers and the cannabis, sort of the hash or the marijuana that was being smoked by Mexicans or sailors, there wasn't a connection made. But certainly there was a very anti-racist sentiment in the United States. There's a very protectionist attitude, and they were very protective of their jobs, as they still seem to be now. And in states like Texas, it was perceived that Mexicans were coming across the border and taking jobs away from Americans. And there wasn't anything that the Americans could do about it except for punish Mexicans that were caught in possession or with cannabis. And so Texas was also one of the very first states to pass a prohibition law against the use of cannabis. And then in the early, I guess between 1914 and the late 1920s, I think there's about 8 or 10 different states that individually passed laws punishing people for being in possession of cannabis. And it's hard to say how far those prohibitions would have gotten if it weren't for its cousin hemp. Because in 1916, something happened that really changed the picture. In 1916, well, I guess two things happened. The American government, the Department of Agriculture, released a report stating that 1 acre of hemp can grow as much fiber as 4 acres of trees. So you need 4 acres of trees to produce the same amount of fiber as 1 acre of hemp, which is quite a substantial ratio. And that accounts for, growing it over, decades and decades. Obviously, a tree takes 80 or 100 years to grow. But when you account for the age of the tree and all these factors, hemp is 4 times more efficient at producing fiber. And so that sent a very strong message to the paper industry in particular, that hemp should be considered over paper, because it's just simply more efficient. And so the other thing that happened that year that was part of this report was the herds that I talked about before, the cork, which was really a waste product before then. The herds could suddenly be turned into paper, and very, very good paper at that. And so that was new. That took something that was discarded into a valuable commodity. And because it doesn't need to be bleached with heavy chemicals, you can actually bleach the hemp herds with hydrogen peroxide, which is fairly benign environmentally speaking, which is quite different than wood and pulp, wood paper production, which relies really heavily on chemicals. It's very nasty. If you've ever been near a pulp mill, you can smell it for miles. It's really ruined the health of a lot of cities around Canada even. I come from Ontario, and I remember Espanola, how bad it smelled growing up. We don't have to have pulp or paper factories that smell like that. If we were using hemp for the paper, we would again be able to use much better things for the environment, and we would make just fantastic paper that would actually even last longer and be easier to recycle than wood is. And so when this report came out in 1916, stating how much more fiber you could get growing hemp, and B, and more importantly even, that that you could make really good paper out of this former waste product, the plant became a lot more valuable to the farmer. But something else happened that year, which was huge, which was the invention of the decorticator. Because one of the hemp's problems has actually traditionally been that it's such a strong fiber. So historically speaking, it's been very labor intensive to cut it down. A lot of it's been done manually, and at least before last century. And the other part is the fiber is like really tough. And so traditionally it would be broken up by one of two means. Either it would be cut and then left in the field, and it would sort of what they call ret, which is kind of rotting, which is letting it sort of rot enough that the fiber will separate from the herd, either by just kind of beating it with your hands like sticks, or in simple machinery, or you could submerge it in water or chemical solutions that would make the process happen faster. But it took a lot of effort. But George Klitzkin invented this decorticator, like this big combine. Go into a hemp field, cut it down, strip off the leaves from the top. It would take the stalk, just kind of crunch it up enough that you would end up with these herds that you could turn into paper or other products like building materials. Like this plywood here is actually made out of the hemp herds that I'm talking about. And so you would end up with these awesome hemp herds on one hand, and then this beautiful fiber on the other that would come out even nicer than this. This is processed in Alberta, and you can actually see a lot of the herd in here. This wouldn't be good for clothing. If you look at the rope I have, you can actually see some small bits of herd that really weren't fully taken out of this. But apparently George's machine would have a fiber come out that was even softer and better processed than what I have here. And between George's machine making it much more efficient to cut down and process, and the fact that you could make paper suddenly out of the herds, the product, the agricultural commodity became 100 times more valuable, basically like overnight or over the summer, for farmers to grow. It just became that much easier to process. There were that many more people to sell it to, and the product was so nice that essentially, it really overnight became very much something that farmers wanted to grow for the money. But it never happened, because the first companies to find out about this decorticator, this new wondrous machine that could revolutionize the hemp industry, the first companies to find out about this difference between wood pulp production and hemp production were the newspaper companies. And so one of these newspaper companies actually bought the patent of the decorticator from George Klitzkin, and they made sure that machine was never built. And to this day, there's never been a machine built as George had first built the prototype of and envisioned. He was sort of duped into thinking they were going to be producing them en masse, but that never happened at all. And these newspaper companies essentially buried the future of hemp, and they were really smart about it. And the key player in that was William Hearst. William, I think, Rudolph Hearst. William Hearst invented the term marijuana. He used some Mexican slang, and came in the early 1920s and started to push the what we know now as the Reefer Madness campaign, putting the fear into people about this new drug, marijuana, that was making people go crazy when they used it. And that was one reason why the Mexicans seemed so crazy to us, because all the Mexicans smoked it. And there's a lot of racism inherent in the ideas of this. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention was that the cotton farmers not only grew hemp and use the hemp, but they allowed their slaves to grow cannabis marijuana and to use it, but they wouldn't let them use alcohol. They seemed to function okay if they smoked pot and ate pot, and it seemed to be a valid part of the life of a slave. You know, it didn't interfere with their work at all. It seemed quite the opposite. It was the one thing that actually made them happy and work harder. And so, you know, it was sort of known among plantations that if you had, you know, a good supply of marijuana for your slaves, you know, they would be happier and healthier when they were working. And so they knew the relationship between hemp and marijuana, because obviously the slaves would have had their different varieties that they would have kept separate and not wanted to have germinated by the much larger hemp fields that would have been full of pollen. And so they would have been aware that they were related enough that that they were essentially, you know, the same plant, just different cousins. And so black people were included in some of the hysteria that the newspapers would promote. And gee, I don't have my book here, but there's a really famous quote, for example, from LA Chief of Police talking about how a man, after smoking cannabis, was just on this rampant murder campaign. So much like what we see today, you know, you'll often see things that suggest that a mass murderer was under the influence of marijuana when they did it, and that somehow, you know, led to what they were doing. They'll play that card every chance that they can get, and they really, again, invented that back in the early 1920s. Here in Canada, it was really picked up on actually the first female judge in the British magistrate, Emily Murphy, who deserves a certain amount of credit for what she did in criminal law and some other circumstances for women's rights. But when it comes to other issues, she was really all over the road. She was a total racist and believed in sterilizing people that weren't perfect, and otherwise was a rampant prohibitionist as well. And so she wrote a series of articles in Maclean's magazine that were later published into a book called The Black Candle. And it picked up on a lot of the hysteria from the United States, and just, you know, kind of combined the use of cannabis and hashish with opium, and would just, you know, put us all down as degenerates and rapists and the worst sorts of characters without any kind of real proof. Well, in Canada here, it got sucked up pretty quick. But I should actually get into more about the industries, and you'll understand why. Like I say, the newspaper companies and the Hearst newspaper company were the first real group of industries that, or industry that really focused on eliminating competition, which was hemp. And they very quickly found friends in cotton farmers, because the cotton industry was really hurting in the 1920s, and hemp was not a welcomed competition to them at all. And because they'd lost a lot of power in the Civil War, they were really resentful of the freedom that blacks had, that they were embracing. And, you know, and I guess, you know, jazz musicians smoking pot just somehow bugged the shit out of them for no good reason. But certainly the cotton farmers were very quick to join the campaign, and they had a good amount of power in the United States. But really, the main industry that has taken hemp out of the picture and taken cannabis out of the picture, I would have to say, has been the automobile industry and the fossil fuels industry. Because there was a big debate going on at the time about whether or not we should be using vegetable fuels or fossil fuels. Now, Rudolf Diesel invented the diesel engine actually to burn biodiesel. And so the original fuels that the diesel engine used were all vegetable fuels, much like the biodiesel that people use today when they get the oil out of you know, deep fryers in restaurants. And so that was the original intent of Rudolf Diesel. But then it was discovered that with a few tinkerings, you could also burn this fossil fuel that you could just suck out of the ground and burn, and didn't have to pay anybody to grow a crop. which to the military-industrial complex is great. Just like paying farmers to grow hemp when you can just cut down trees for free, right? Like you don't have to pay anybody to grow a tree if you got the rights to the forest. You just so you know, cutting out the middlemen to the industrial complex is you know, a really good thing. And so they figured that they could control the economy more by you know, using fossil fuels. And there was a big debate because it was kind of obvious that they needed to go one way or the other. That you know, for the automobile industries to develop as a group in any sense, it would be better to have one kind of fuel instead of two fuel stations at once. And so there was a debate going on, but both kinds of technology were being developed at the same time. And when alcohol was prohibited in the United States, there was a few reasons why. Certainly on one hand, there's kind of the religious temperance movement that wanted everybody to be sober. And when we look at the history of prohibition, it really goes back into religious prohibitions where people were killed, not just excommunicated, but often killed, like, you know, in the witch hunts and stuff, if they used plants to heal. Or certainly, you know, when the Roman Catholic Church got formed, there were waves where anybody that didn't prescribe to the church was killed. And so using plants to heal was strictly forbidden, or to worship plants at the very least. And so we formed governments actually to try to take power away from these moralists, these religious freaks that would you know, condemn us and cause us misery for simply not prescribing to their beliefs. But that didn't convince religious zealots to stop trying to impose their moral beliefs. They've just changed their tactics and really have consolidated behind governments and have used governments to impose their moral beliefs upon the peoples time and time again. And so there was, with the temperance movement and when alcohol prohibition was brought in, there was this Puritanism, you know, this belief against the use of any kind of drug that was behind it. But that wasn't the only thing behind it. That's what we hear of the most. You know, we hear most about women that were being beaten by their drunk husbands, and there was nothing to stop that. That was one of the main reasons of alcohol prohibition, or that it was brought in, that we're being told. But the main reason that alcohol was prohibited was so that these fossil fuel companies could stop farmers and everybody else from making their own fuel, because they made it illegal to basically distill anything on your property. And so alcohol prohibition actually, you know, stopped farmers from distilling or making their own biofuels, and a lot of them switched to seed fuels, because it was still legal to press out an oil out of your seed, your hemp seed, for example, and you could use that in your diesel engine, and that was fine. You didn't have to do any distilling or anything like that for that kind of fuel. But not many actually switched over. A lot of people, when they weren't allowed to make their own biofuels, switched over to fossil fuel. And so the main architect of the Marijuana Tax Act was a man called Andrew Mellon. Andrew Mellon was the founder of Gulf Oil. He was one of the creators, basically, of General Motors. He was the banker of DuPont Chemicals in the early 1900s. And DuPont, again, you know, they had their hands in all this, right? DuPont was helping to make wood pulp, because paper production used a lot of chemicals. They were selling all sorts of stuff. Like 50% of the chemicals being produced in the United States, I think, were being used in cotton production at the time. So they're heavily involved in the cotton industry. Certainly in fossil fuels as well. The chemical industry was very involved. And so Andrew Mellon, in developing these various industries that were all directly opposed to hemp, became the richest man in America. And because the Americans liked their money, they actually made him their secretary-treasurer. So he was the guy deciding where the money got spent in the military and the schools and the hospitals. And one of the first things Andrew Mellon did was eliminate hemp from any use in the American government. They eliminated it from the military and the Navy, and replaced hemp with all sorts of other products. They eliminated it out of schools, They eliminated out of research as well, so that nobody could get research into hemp anymore, whether it was the genetics of it or producing it or marketing it. They were marketing everything else that was new, though. So synthetic materials like polyester and plastics, all these things, they were being heavily promoted. And so there's all sorts of research being put into pharmaceutical products. But if you wanted to do any research into hemp, the American government would cut you out. And so the next thing that he and these other companies did, in particular in the food industry, was make sure that nobody was buying hemp, that nobody was putting hemp into... The next thing that he did was he gave Harry Anslinger control of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And that was in the late 1920s. Certainly only maybe a dozen states had passed cannabis marijuana laws, and but the alcohol prohibition, I think it was 1928 that alcohol prohibition was finally taken down in the United States. It was about 10 years where it was prohibited down there, and they had a lot of unemployed law enforcement at the time, and so I guess the thing about Harry Anslinger is that he was quite an asshole. He was an arrogant, loud, abrasive person. And Andrew Mellon was, like I say, this rich man. And Harry Anslinger actually married one of his nieces. And so he wasn't happy about this guy marrying into the family. He didn't like him. He didn't want him having anything to do with the family money. But you got to do something with him, right? So he gave Harry Anslinger this Department of or Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and basically, sicked him on the financial competition of the family's money. And so Harry Anslinger, spent almost, I think, 4 decades going around the world beating the drum of prohibition, forcing governments all over to enact all sorts of drug laws, not just cannabis drug laws, certainly, but basically everything that the pharmaceutical companies didn't want to control, he was allowed to go after. And it had very little to do with the actual effect of the drugs, or certainly with cannabis that they were trying to prohibit, and everything to do with the control of the money. And so again, Harry Anslinger was hired and given what's now called the DEA back in 1928, and the United States, though, was still fairly democratic, and by that time, in many other countries, prohibition had already been enacted. Here in Canada, like I said earlier, we actually prohibited cannabis in 1923, and the reason is because the United States was actually a lot more democratic at the time and open, and they had to have a discussion before passing laws. Here in Canada in 1923, the rich had such firm control over what happened in Ottawa and what people understood was happening in Ottawa, that the cannabis laws were passed here in this country with virtually no debate. Like, no debate at all. Like, we have these laws, cannabis marijuana is bad, so we're going to prohibit it. End of story. And that was, again, 14 years before Prohibition was finally enacted in the United States. And interestingly enough, it was the Marijuana Tax Act. They didn't even really prohibit it, but they put a tax of, I think it was $100 an ounce on anybody that grew cannabis marijuana, which today actually, would probably be something that a few people in the United States would go for if the United States was still issuing that. But back in 1937, $100 for an ounce was absurd. It was certainly many, many, many more times what it was worth. And that's why it was virtually impossible for a hemp farmer to grow it anymore, because when you grow hemp, it's not in ounces, it's in tons. It's a very prolific plant. And so they with the Marijuana Tax Act, they virtually made it illegal for hemp farmers to do that. But hemp farmers didn't see it coming. Again, the poultry farmers in America did. But the rest of the hemp industry was completely left out of this Marijuana Tax Act. They had no idea that the Marijuana Tax Act was going to affect hemp any more than the American Medical Association knew that it was going to affect cannabis. Because the American Medical Association knew what cannabis indica was. You know, that's historically what cannabis has been called by the medical industry. So if you hear about, say, Queen Victoria using cannabis for menstrual cramps, it was cannabis indica that her doctor prescribed. If you looked at, or look at any of the old bottles of tinctures and stuff from the turn of the century, they were all cannabis, so they had cannabis labeled on them. And so the American Medical Association was really, just at the last minute made aware that these laws would be applied to them. But a lot of people didn't know that the Marijuana Tax Act was coming into effect and what impact it would have. In fact, Henry Ford, the crazy man that he was still going ahead and developing hemp products. There's a great picture of him, and even a video, if you can find it online, of him hitting a car with a sledgehammer, and it's hemp fiberglass. And it's just amazing. He's just giving it with this sledgehammer, and the fiberglass body is just popping back out. And I think there's one point in the video where it sort of stays in, and he just kind of goes in behind and pop, and it just goes back to where it should be. And so and this vehicle also ran from the hemp seed fuel. And so Henry Ford, when he was developing this stuff, though, didn't know anything about these plans. In fact, Popular Mechanics in 1938 printed a story called The New Billion-Dollar Crop. And it's all about cannabis, about hemp. And they had no idea when that story had been printed that actually it had almost been made illegal just months before with the Marijuana Tax Act. It just completely blindsided them. And that was the first time that the number, $1 billion, had been applied to an agricultural commodity by a serious publication in the United States. And that's because they sort of looked into its potential for fiberglass and fuel and everything that you and I know that it can be used for. And they just saw that this was the most valuable plant in the world. And that was very quickly and easily taken away with the Marijuana Tax Act, again, of 1937, the year before that Popular Mechanics article came out. But hemp wasn't entirely forgotten, and in an ironic way, just a few years later, when World War II erupted, the American government in particular made a call for farmers to grow hemp. And there's a short campaign called Hemp for Victory. I believe it's like 1942 to 1944, where the American government was really pushing hard to revive the American hemp industries, for rope in particular, because the Navy and the Army used a lot of rope, and the nylon rope just doesn't cut it. Nylon doesn't work very well in the winter, for example. It freezes and becomes very brittle. And it was really ironic that the United States government, for a very brief time, attempted to revive the cannabis industry, but then they shut it down as soon as the war was over, and very quickly tried to erase even the memory of the Hemp for Victory campaign. But it is something that again, the industrial complex, these various industries, the chemical industries, the fossil fuel industries, cotton industries, paper industries, the newspaper companies that own, a lot of this, these very powerful groups are completely and totally opposed to a plant-based economy where farmers would be able to grow their own fuel and provide their own energy as well beyond that, and have this product to sell aside. And so it's something that when I first became involved in Hempology, I really had no idea of why it was made illegal. I, like everyone else, thought that it was an intoxicant, and they made it, illegal, much like, opium and cocaine, in order to try to control people out of fear, right? Because it wasn't out of science, obviously. But that's not why cannabis was made illegal at all. I'm thoroughly convinced that if it was only about the herb that we love to smoke, we wouldn't be in the state that we're in today, not just legally but financially as well. I'm strongly convinced, especially having seen a hemp field this summer, that this is the most prolific and valuable plant that we could possibly grow. And it can provide for so many of our basic needs, and reviving our agricultural communities should be a very important goal of the governments around the world for a number of different reasons. And I don't think that there could be a better opportunity to do that than by bringing hemp back into the economy in all of its forms. We should be wearing hemp. Most of our buildings should be made out of hemp. Most of our furniture should be made out of hemp. Most of what we're eating should have hemp. Our cars, I posted a really cool picture of a new car with a hemp body on it now. But we could be including hemp in almost every manufactured product that's being put out there today. And we should be, because it's one of the most environmentally friendly products, and again, one of the most valuable for our farmers. And so the Marijuana Tax Act and the prohibition of cannabis, in many reasons, I think, and many others, is the worst set of laws since slavery, because it's not only had a dramatic impact upon people, but it's really hurt our planet as well, and forced people to use a lot of products that are harmful both in their production and in their use. And the cancer rates that we're seeing today, and many of the other problems with disease, with diabetes and stuff, I don't think we would see if we had a more health-based and agricultural-based economy. And so I'm very hopeful for the future, because this plant is really taking root, and the days of 1937 are long gone, and it's certainly much more history than it is a reality. And so speaking of reality, next week, and if you're sticking around for 420, I'm going to say it a lot more, we have Dana Larson coming, who's the campaign director, you could say, of the Sensible BC decriminalized cannabis campaign that's really just hitting the headlines now. And so next Monday night, there's a big meeting in downtown Victoria at the Alex Goulden Hall about it. And Dana will be here next week from 3 to 4 to do the Pot and Politics lecture and talk about the future, because, again, the prohibition is more of a history than a fact, but we still are fighting it on a lot of levels. And so I really appreciate Dana coming, and I really appreciate all you coming out on such a beautiful day and coming to Hempology here. So I'm just going to wrap it up, and yeah, like I say, we got a couple guest lectures. 2 weeks from now, we're going to do hemp products as well. My friend Shane's company from Hemp and Company, and we'll be here on the lawn as long as the weather's nice. So again, thanks everybody for coming out. Have a great day, and smoke them if you got it.